Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Jake has written a book that I'll probably mangle. The title is Podcasting Starter Kit.
Yep, that's correct. Easy enough.
And I actually went and paid real money for this online to look at it, and it was so cool, I asked him if you could have it for free. and he said...
and I said, sure.
Okay.
So...
Is this like the Oprah show? Is it under our chairs?
Yeah.
No, it is not under your chairs. It's actually a PDF. But it is not DRM or anything, so you can share it with other employees or whatever and spread
Is
the
that
word.
possible to put that listed out internally right on your archive link?
Probably.
Okay. If not, I'll send out mail.
Yeah.
And actually, I do have an update that's coming out to it this Friday. So it may even make sense to wait to post it until then, so that
Well, make sure it's
information
out
is
when
more
you
current.
promise it, because we're a group of people, we're going to be really pissy if that doesn't get shipped from you.
It's shipping on the Longhorn time frame.
Okay,
How's
all
that?
right. Any Friday. It'll be out some Friday.
Some
Okay.
Friday. Some Friday before Longhorn ships.
So go ahead.
All right, so starting out, I actually pulled up here. For me, podcasting is more of a process, really, than it specifically being an audio or a video file. It's a convenient way for people to listen or watch what they want when they want. I think one of the best examples of people doing something really, really right with podcasting is actually Channel 9. Robert Scoble and the rest of that team are really, really working at putting a human face on Microsoft, and I think that's a really good thing. And I would love to see everyone in the room doing something similar. And by something similar, I don't mean emulating Channel 9 and going around and interviewing people, but I mean creating that sort of human interaction where we all, those of us on the outside, actually get a chance to realize that Microsoft isn't this big evil empire, that there actually are real people that are really passionate about making cool products. So that's my little motivational speech on that. But I guess one question I have for you all is, how I assume you're already all familiar with podcasting. Is there anybody in the room that actually is podcasting? And which podcast do you do?
Actually, we're doing it to I'm in developer and platform evangelism.
Okay.
So we're responsible for early adoption of Microsoft technologies prior to launch. And we actually just did our first podcast, and we're actually doing that with our field developer evangelists.
Okay.
So we actually provided them with an MP3 WMA player, and
Cool.
each month they get something new.
Cool. And is Michael Lehman a part of that, or is he?
He's in one of our groups, yes.
Okay. Yes.
So Michael's hosting mine, so we're hosting ours on Channel 9.
Okay.
Starting in September, and Michael Lehman.
Very
is
cool.
our-
Cool. So, I guess basically, a lot of the stuff that I read about in the podcasting starter kit is how to do all this stuff using a PC and plugging in a whole lot of stuff. But for me, the like bare bones easiest way to do it is to take some kind of portable recorder, whether it's this is an Edirol R1 that records the compact flash, and I mean basically you just plug in a mic, talk into the mic, and then you can copy the file over and edit it, which is a lot more foolproof than trying to actually rig everything up on your computer so that you don't get like device conflicts and you don't get like echoing of audio from like your Outlook pinging in the background as you get new mail, and all of the many audible signals that you have on your system. And so, I mean, one of the things that we do. Oh wow. One of the things that we do with the Chris Pirillo show, which I'm the producer of the Chris Pirillo show. I don't know if any of you know Chris or not, but Chris used to be on Tech TV's Call for Help, and we were very briefly the #1 podcast in iTunes directory, which either is or isn't a sort of nebulous honor, because there's some speculation that the results are rigged in iTunes, so that if you click subscribe a whole bunch of times, that you will see your results grow up into the top 100. In some ways, I would tend to agree with that assessment because we didn't really notice a massive increase in the number of downloads that we had as a result of being number one. So, but anyway, we can say that we're number one. And for right now, you definitely, even though this is Microsoft, it would be very, very advisable to, when you do a podcast, get it listed in the iTunes directory. Another thing about us being in the iTunes directory is we're sort of subtly a Trojan horse for Windows Media because every one of our podcasts is sponsored by Windows Media. And I mean Trojan horse in a good way, not in the sort of backdoor infect your system sort of way. So anyway, back to the Edirol R1 this is the primary tool that we use when we're out in the field because it is so perfect for one thing, sticking in my pocket, so I don't have to carry a laptop around with me to actually record to. But the other thing is, it's got a really great limiter on it so that you're never going to have the volume get blown out by somebody happening to, like suddenly drastically shift their volume if they get excited about whatever it is that you're talking to them about. It also works really well just for sitting at your desk and recording to that. There's plenty of times where I will just record straight from a microphone to this in my office, simply because hooking up your PC specifically for the recording portion of it really complicates it more than it needs to. You could, if you have one of those like IRiver MP3 players, or that I think all of the, Matt, am I correct that all of the IRiver stuff is Place for Sure compliant?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, so. But those actually work really well as a recording device too, and you can hook up an external microphone to them. The disadvantage is that they don't have any kind of limiting, so you kind of really have to like ride the volume to make sure that you're not going to blow out the sound quality. But I realize that not everybody wants to deal with having to record to something like this, and then because basically I record to this, I take out the compact flash card, put it in a compact flash card reader, and transfer it over. And then if there's any editing that needs to be done to the file, which invariably there's ums and ahs that really shouldn't be there, then we'll edit it in an app like Adobe Audition is probably my favorite app to use. Audacity, which is a free app that's available through SourceForge, is one that I talk about in Podcasting Starter Kit because the primary audience that I found for that is people who are looking for free solutions to stuff. But that said, Adobe Audition has enough cool features for being able to optimize your audio in that it's worth the monetary investment in terms of being able to get through the production process faster. And then a couple of things that I wanted to talk specifically about are some of the things that I would consider to be good examples of podcasts versus bad examples of podcasts. And so I guess I'll start with one that is what I would consider to be a bad example if I can figure out how to do this. Hey. And Dave Weiner, who's one of the guys that is credited with pioneering the whole podcasting thing, I actually consider to be one of the absolute worst podcasters in terms of having to listen to on the planet, because
And the next stop was in Billings, Montana, and by then it would already sort of chilled out a little bit, and then so, from then on.
Anyway, nobody really wants to listen to and for very long at one time. And I'm sure I'm doing that up here on stage, but if I was recording this, I would edit that all out. So, I mean, that is like one of the first lessons that I think everybody should learn is if you, I mean, it's great to interview people. It's great to sit into a monologue, but if you lose your train of thought and just sort of start rambling, eliminate it. Nobody wants to listen to that. At least not for very long. For some reason, people are willing to put up with Dave doing it because Dave is Dave. But that's not a good way to do things. And speaking of that, I just said and. Now, I'm going to show you this video clip of Rocketboom, which I consider to be It's a video, but it's also what I would consider
We
to
were
be
just saying
a
last
good
week that
example of a
Microsoft
podcast
is
because
slow
it is
to
well
catch
produced.
on. Let's see this.
It's not always funny. This is actually a clip from the PDC.
Is this the first podcast Bill's ever done?
Well, welcome to the podcast of the Microsoft Mobile and Embedded Developers Conference.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Fantastic. Pretty substantial content there, Bill. Wait a minute. Are
So-
you allowed to use WMV files for a podcast?
Anyway, and so the reason this isn't to pick on Microsoft, and actually this is available as a WMV, but for some reason they encoded it with some really bad audio quality, and it sounds really garbled in the Windows version of it. So, which wasn't true of any of the other selections that I chose when I was sampling it, but that particular one, I don't know if they did it on purpose. But I think they have really good production in terms of cutting from segment to segment. I didn't really illustrate it well there. And that was actually Pete Grondel over at MS Studios, I think was one of the guys that they showed really briefly at the beginning of that. And he's kind of doing some really cool stuff with going around to the various Microsoft events and trying to capture stuff that's going on behind the scenes. And I don't know if any of that is really getting public. Hey, Pete's actually here. But he's actually doing some really cool stuff in terms of going out and capturing stuff for the various events and actually kind of putting a behind-the-scenes face on it. And I don't know, is that actually publicly available, or is it available on shares? Or,
oh, yeah.
I mean, I know there's the stuff that...
Tech Ed Podcast and MEDC Podcast. It's like 200 videos between the two of the events.
And you got to watch the one where Pete's like sleeping in the back of a car. That's probably the best one of the videos. But no, so Rocketboom does this whole thing where they'll go through and it's kind of a Daily Show style news of the web, and some of it tends to slant towards you have to sort of follow all of the blogs that they talk about to really get what they're talking about. That was part of why I chose this example, because I mean, obviously everybody knows who Bill Gates is here, or at least I hope so. But they have a sense of humor that is really quite funny. So they always end with a random video.
It takes something that's not just a little bit different. It takes something that's really new and really captures people's imagination. And the Macintosh, of all the machines I've ever seen, is the only one that meets that standard.
And of course, that's why Microsoft has invested so heavily in DRM, so that you can't ever have things like that leak out in the future. But but no, but I mean that's kind of they kind of stick to a theme throughout the show, and then they'll have sort of the John Daly moment of Zen at the end of their show where they tie it all together. And so I mean I think that's an example of something that's really good. Another one that I think is really good that that doesn't get quite the same level of production, but at the same time I think that's a good thing, is the MSDN Channel 9 stuff, which I don't know if everybody in here has seen this stuff or not.
Look at me, forget the cameras here. Okay. Who are you? That's my favorite question. Sorry, who are you?
I'm a geek. I'm Jim Allchin.
And what do you do?
What do I do? I run what's called the Platforms Group. That's the organization that ships most of the heavy API carriers for the company, SQLs and exchanges and Windows. I'm sure you've heard of that.
Windows?
Yeah.
Hold on.
All right, anyway. Well, I won't make you watch that whole thing. But because it's actually, I think it's like about 45 minutes long. But for me, as somebody outside of Microsoft, that is a really great example of what's being done right, because, I mean, Jim Allchin's a guy that normally we'll see him, in the press, giving some sort of formal speech. And in that instance, he is just a regular guy that Robert Scoble is interviewing, and you find out, if you watch the entire thing, I mean, you actually come away with a sense of, you feel like you know more about Jim Allchin, the person, than Jim Allchin, the executive at Microsoft. And so not all of the stuff at MSDN goes down that particular direction, but at the same time, it lends a real good sense of who the company is or who the people are behind the company. So before I just launch off into a how-to podcast, is there anybody that has any specific questions that they want addressed related to podcasting as it applies to the process of doing it?
The main hook I'm interested in is how can I use podcasting to take content that I do for a show of 7,000 people like TechEd and somehow then extrapolate that out worldwide. I'm trying to broaden our base and increase our reach, and I'm thinking about how can I grab bits, grab people, grab information to a larger audience than I have right now.
So it's stuff that you're already currently recording?
It's either recorded or it's archived in some way, but I'm not really sure that the way we archive it is appropriate for trying to use it on a real large basis.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the primary way to deal with that is just to make it, and is this stuff that you actually want available to the entire world or to a specific audience?
Yeah.
I mean, the thing that you really have to have in that instance is you have to make it available via RSS or exposed through a website like Channel 9 so that people can choose to subscribe to it or actually just download it on demand. And I think that there's a lot within the podcasting community that is pushing way too hard on trying to get people to subscribe rather than sort of the piecemeal, I just want to download this one segment here because, frankly, I don't want 500 gigabytes of stuff that I'm never going to watch on my hard drive. Yes?
What do you see as a barrier to this whole phenomenon going down the same road that reality TV's gone down?
In terms of, what do you mean?
The level of content dropping and dropping and dropping, but getting more and more and more specific.
I don't think the level of content currently available in podcasting could actually get any lower. I don't know how it could get worse. It can only get better from here. Because if you look at, there's the very organic level of guy sitting in his basement talking about, Donna Drew is a good example of this. I don't know if any of you in the room have listened to Donna Drew. There's this couple from Wisconsin that just sort of talk about going to the bar or argue or just whatever happens to be on their mind on any given day. And it's not really all that interesting, but it's kind of a train wreck like any other reality show where you can't help but listen for a while. The novelty wore off for me after maybe 2 times listening to it, but I can definitely see where the appeal is based on the kinds of television that we have right now.
You mentioned how you found out about that and why you listened to it.
Donna Drew. I found out about Donna Drew because they were one of the first people that started podcasting, and so there was a very limited sort of little niche of things to find out about. Now, probably the way that I would have found out about it was the fact that they were within the top 100 podcasts in iTunes, and I would have just decided to check it out for that reason. Although that's becoming less a useful way to check stuff out. Because ABC, NBC, CNN, NPR have all moved in, mostly taking over the entire top 100, and so those are all kind of known quantities anyway. And so, if you're already familiar with MarketWatch, you're not really going to check out MarketWatch unless you really want to listen to it. Which at the same time. It's good that MarketWatch is there because having all that stuff available has actually caused me to listen to stuff that I haven't listened to in years because I didn't want to bother to turn on the TV at the time it was on because I wouldn't necessarily be there. Yes?
My question, then you better go on, otherwise we'll question you for the whole time.
Well, hey, if you got lots of questions, that's okay.
The question is there a breakdown between audio-only podcast and audio-video? Is that finding, dead time commuting or working in the yard or just around the house, you can listen to a lot more than you can through video.
True. I think the vast majority of stuff is currently available as audio. I think if the next step for Channel 9 really ought to be that in addition to offering the videos, they ought to offer it as an audio only. Because I hope that it would be nice if someday in the future we just had devices that all would just sort of, you take essentially video is the common file format, and then if you aren't in a place where you can watch video, you just listen to the audio. And the devices would just work across the board, but we're not in that world. So I mean, offering two formats, if you want to do video, I think is the way to go over the short term. But if you have video, I think there's a high value in having the video because it does make a connection that you don't really make with audio.
But I think a lot of that really depends on your audience and where and when you're trying to reach them.
Well, ideally, you're trying to reach them all the time.
Yeah, but for like us, for the developer evangelists that are out in the field, we're trying. They're traveling. They're going to meet with customers. They're, in between appointments, things like that. So, a video type segment doesn't make as much sense as audio does.
True.
Because audio is much more convenient. They can download and play it. It could be cut to, it could be burned to like a CD RED format, right, and burned as a CD, regular audio CD. So there are a lot of things that we can do, but you have to know your audience.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. It definitely depends on the audience. In terms of, and I'm not, by showing two examples of things that are video, I'm not advocating that everyone should do video. It just happens that I didn't want to, because in some ways, I think that the podcasts that, say, Adam Curry is doing, and probably like our show, the Chris Pirillo show, are two of the better produced podcasts. Not to say that both of them couldn't be better in different ways, but I think both of those tend to be sort of on the better end, and I didn't really want to use myself as an example of a well-produced podcast, so I was trying to pick some things that sort of integrate the video aspect of it as well. Yes?
Do you have any sense of when people are using it more, using podcasts more, whether they're putting it into their MP3 players or they're looking on their laptops? Because I am not familiar with all by any means, the podcasts that are out there, but I would think that the video production values are so low that it doesn't really matter whether you see anything or not.
Well, it depends, because in a lot of cases, you're absolutely right. There's some of the stuff that happens on like Rocketboom, for instance. There is a certain amount of the delivery that it's funnier if you're actually seeing the delivery, not necessarily in that segment that I showed, but. That's also a humor-oriented thing, and some humor tend towards physical humor. But I think that if you were to start with a baseline, audio would be the baseline. Do audio, and if at some point in the future it makes sense to do video, then do video. Because I think, and to speak to your question of are people listening on their MP3 player or are they listening on their desktop, based on the kinds of questions I get, I think a lot of people are listening on their MP3 player, but there are also a huge number of people that are listening on their desktop. Because I get questions from a lot of people about, well, I don't have an iPod, or I don't have a portable player. Can I listen to this? And the obvious answer is yeah, your computer, your speakers, or you could burn a CD or whatever. So I think it's all across the board in terms of where people are currently listening right now. Yes?
To a global audience, I'm curious your opinion about frequency and duration of shows. How often you release them, once a day versus once a week, and then how long they are. For like the Gilmore Gang, I think is like an hour at least, whereas like Rocketboom tends to be only about 10 minutes or so. So
I think that entirely depends on what the material is, because one of the podcasts that I listen to fairly religiously is IT Conversations, simply because they have a lot of like really information dense material that they interview interesting people in technology that it would take a lot of time to read some of the same information that you can get in a half-hour, 45-minute podcast. I think that an hour is kind of a good limit based on a lot of the feedback that we've gotten in the various experimenting that we've done with the Chris Pirillo show, which is not to say that you couldn't do it a lot less. Because depending on, and a lot of it depends on, say, there's a good percentage of the people who listen that are commuters. And so if your commute's a 15-minute commute, you don't really want an hour podcast because you're going to get to work and not really be able to listen to the other 45 minutes, or you're going to have to pause listening to the other 45 minutes until some point later in the day. And so I think that there is value in different format lengths. You really have to assess, am I covering the topic that I want to cover effectively in the amount of time? And I mean, there's some editing that we do of the Chris Pirillo show stuff, specifically because the topic got a little way off track, and so it's like, well, we got this hour-and-a-half thing, but we could really cut it down to an hour because there was 30 minutes of nonsense there that nobody other than us is really going to think is clever and shouldn't really be there. Yes?
One of the things I was hoping you would cover today is how to make sure that your audio levels are right so that people listening aren't cranking their speakers way up or having to turn them
okay.
down.
Yeah, that's definitely one thing that I will cover. And maybe with that, I will dive into a couple of the things with recording.
One real quick question. So you're doing about an hour duration for the podcast.
Yeah.
What's your frequency?
Frequency? For the Chris Pirillo show, we actually do a 3-hour live show, and so we break that up into like 3 one-hour segments. And I'm trying to over time get it down so that at worst, if we've like gone to a bunch of trade shows, not put out more than an hour of content per day, because otherwise I think we start to lose listeners at that point.
And your production cost per hour of content produced?
That's hard to say because I mean it's my time. So I probably consider my time to be worth more than like anyone else would consider. Yeah, no, definitely more than Chris does. So anyway, and then the other thing I was going to say is we talk a lot about players, but one of the things, and I know that a lot of Microsoft people have phones like this phone, and this is actually a really great player for listening to podcasts. If you happen to have an audio in jack on your car, you can even run a headphone jack out from this into your car's input jack, and you don't even need any other portable player. So, and I mean that's actually become sort of my player of choice in terms of listening to about everything but podcasts. I actually started using an iPod again because of iTunes interface with podcasting, because it's just so much better than like anything else at the moment. But so in terms of actually getting a podcast edited so that it sounds good, what I'm going to start with, rather than showing you how to do, do you want to see actually the recording process? Okay. Because, I mean, in terms of how I would do the recording process, I would either like take this Edirol here and record something, and I'll pull in a raw track rather than actually recording something here and then taking the time to transfer it, because I think that the time is probably better spent actually demonstrating the process. But I mean, I would basically just record a conversation or monologue or something here, and then take the compact flash card out. Or the other thing that I would do, which this isn't going to be very easy to show, is sometimes if I'm just recording something, depending on what the audio quality I want it to be this is just like a headset that came with, I think, Dragon Naturally Speaking, and it's got decent noise cancellation on it and that. And so I mean, this just gets plugged into the record line on your computer. With the mini plug adapter I have on here, this could just as easily be plugged in to do the recording on the computer. And then I use Adobe Audition to do the recording. I don't know if does that actually change the brightness on there, or is that only on my screen? So I would just do the recording from here, and we'll see if I actually have this set up so that it'll work. And I tend to record everything in mono simply because I mean I'm only one voice, and so really in effect stereo is doubling. It's just doubling the track. It's just basically like taking down the same exact track twice. And we don't do a ton with music production in the podcast that we do, but so anyway, that's an example of the level being way too loud and in serious need of adjustment. Because if you look here, where the volume level is hitting clear up at the where's that laser pointer? Anyway, but where it's like spiking clear up to the top of the screen, you really don't want that, because at that point you're introducing clipping into the audio file, and you're going to have, it's going to sound distorted, and that's something that you really can't fix. There are software tools that will sort of fix clipping, but they don't really work very well. So, I mean, the thing to do is pull up the, let's see if I can actually see it here. Pull up the volume control in, and is it? Oh yeah, it is in the toolbar. I didn't see it for some reason. Got too many things in the toolbar. I installed Skype and Gizmo on here to possibly demonstrate recording VoIP calls. And so anyway, basically you just switch over to the recording control, and then you can back off the microphone volume to a level so that it's not spiking clear up out of the into the clipping range. And I tend to lean towards trying to keep it down so that it stays consistently below like -6, which is about right there, because that leaves room to actually edit the file so that you don't end up having to fight with messy volume later. But the thing that I like about Adobe Audition that you can do, and I'll stop this recording because we don't really need to just listen to me record on and on. Okay, but one of the cool things that you can do with Adobe Audition that you can't do with, say, Audacity, which is the other thing, which is the other product that I talk about specifically in the Podcasting Starter Kit, is that you can add a limiter to the recording so that the limiting, so that you tell the software to not allow you to have the volume go above that certain level. Now, if you don't have your volume set correctly, and you do that, you can still end up with like an overcompressed sounding file, so that it sounds like your voice, because you won't really have enough dynamic range in the file, because people's voices naturally tend to rise and fall, and if your volume level on the volume setting for the microphone is set to 10, and you're cutting it off so that it doesn't ever go that high, you may end up with an overcompressed sound. But by setting that and then recording, it should give me so that I never, and actually, I won't do it on that. I have to be back in the multi-track view to get it to work. All right. So after setting that, if I switched over here to recording, oh, that's recording in stereo. All right. Hold on. Here. So if I'm recording here, though, with that set, then it shouldn't ever, I should not be able to spike the volume, which maybe it didn't actually turn it on. Hold on. Not. All right. Sorry about Okay. So in theory, it shouldn't let me go over a certain level when I'm talking, although it still looks like it's doing it. So apparently I'm not, but that's supposed to work, and apparently I'm not doing something correctly with it right now. But the next thing, I mean, beyond actually setting like a hard limit so that you don't like max out the audio file, the other thing that you can do is when you're actually editing a track, which we'll bring in. And this track was actually recorded, I think, using the Adderall. And as you can see here, it was actually it's a stereo recorded track because it's got both channels. But the thing that I tend to do when I'm editing these files is I try to look for where the kind of the threshold of the peak values are in the files. Like like this particular area here is quite a bit louder than everything else in the file. But this, if you look like in this little section that I've selected here, it looks like where the volume spikes all start in the file are at, say, roughly like -12, because you got -9 here, -15, and it's roughly at say -12. So I will select the entire file and then hard limit the entire file at -12 so that I'm eliminating all the volume spikes in the file so that you're not getting those abrupt highs and lows in the file, so that you've got somebody constantly having to ride the volume control on their car stereo as they're listening on the way to work. And then I go through, after this finishes that, and I will, on the individual segments that are significantly quieter, will boost the volume on individual segments. It's really a whole lot better if you can get the volume at a consistent level throughout without having to do this, because otherwise it's a lot of work. And so this kind of goes back to the question about how much production time does it take. It entirely depends on how much how well you correctly set up the process to begin with. And I mean, one of the things that we've discovered, which is certainly not a new discovery, but I mean, one of the things that we found out is that in going out and interviewing people in the field, it's a lot harder to get a consistent audio level than if you're, say, sitting at your desk and interviewing someone else on your product team, or if you're just doing a monologue. It's a lot easier to control the environment there, because I mean, like what we're ending up doing is we're out in the field and Chris will be interviewing somebody, and then you stick the mic over in front of somebody else's face, and their voice is just so much quieter, either because they just don't happen to be projecting, or I mean, Chris is kind of a loud person anyway, and so that creates a situation where it's a lot harder to actually get a consistent volume level. But if you can get the consistent volume level up front, you avoid the sort of wait to get the production to where it should be on the back end, and you can actually sort of get through editing the audio file. I mean, one of the things that I've kind of suggested is that if you do nothing else when you're editing your audio files before you put them out, it's kind of go through, find where that sort of like baseline peak level is in the file, so that anything that spikes above that, you just eliminate like I did here. And then from there, because I mean, like what I would typically do is I would find like this spot here is quieter than like the section on the left and the right of it. And so I would probably boost that volume by using like the software amplification, so that it brings it up so that it's approximately the same volume. But if you do nothing else, doing the hard limiting that I did, where you cut off all of the like massive volume spikes, and then just normalizing the audio so that you're, and I typically normalize to about -2. I know that some people would suggest normalizing to louder than that, but I tend to do that because sometimes it leaves room to go back and play with it later if you decide that you did something wrong, rather than boosting it all the way to the maximum threshold before clipping.
But you have to be really selective when you're doing that, because I mean, when someone speaks, normally when they're emphasizing or they're excited about it, their volume will tend to be normally louder, and so you don't want to lose that.
True.
True,
and that's kind of in terms of when I'm speaking to overcompression, you can definitely compress that out. But in general, like if you look at a waveform where somebody's excited versus where they're just normally talking, their sort of like baseline volume is distinctly louder anyway, and so by normalizing it. Apparently my drive has too much stuff on it. But by normalizing it, you're still, like, wherever the peak volume is still going to be the peak volume in the audio file. It's increasing proportionately increasing the volume of the audio file up to that -2 threshold. So the peak volume, if the peak volume right now is at -12, what's -12 when it's done normalizing will be -2, and anything that and it will be percentage-wise increased so that it's consistent across the board.
Now, when you talk about interviewing, you normally just use the one mic setup. You have 6-channel mixer sitting there, right?
I do have that. We don't typically take that in the field because it's a hassle to carry it around at conferences. We do have a Marantz unit that is very similar to that Edirol unit that actually has 2 XLR connections on it, and I have in the past hooked up 2 microphones and then just had both people hold the microphone, and then one person is on the left channel and one person's on the right channel. The thing that I found about that is that if you give somebody a microphone, they have a tendency to, like, especially at a conference, they'll have a tendency to be like looking around. The microphone will be over here, and so then you run into the problem of the microphone was never in front of their face, which is almost worse than having to hassle with having both people on the same channel. Well, we do have some headset mics that we use in the studio that prevent that, but again, it's not really practical for carrying it around at conferences. So I mean, in terms of something that you could do in-house to do that, then definitely if you had 2 headset mics, that would probably be more ideal. Because I know that even when we're doing like our in-studio stuff, there's plenty of distractions where somebody will be inclined to turn their head, and at least with the headset on, the microphone is still going to be in the same place that it was. Yes?
2 questions. One is there are headsets that are USB that don't go through the sound card. Did you ever use those? Did you find them better? I know they're better for like voice recognition.
It depends entirely on, well, it depends on a lot of factors. If all you're doing is using just that headset for audio, then they work really well. If you're using that headset and any other audio input sources, you tend to get some latency because the sound card and the USB drivers are not going to be in sync.
Okay, second question. You mentioned that when you're using this recorder, this CM recorder that you had, you have less of this problem of spikes because it knows how to normalize?
This particular one does really well with that. It's got an onboard limiter, and it does really, really well. The Marantz unit has something that's called like automatic gain control, which I have found just makes noise a whole lot louder. It makes everything louder, and while you get a more consistent like audio file level, you also get like your noise floor has gone from a little bit of background noise to being something that you can't possibly ignore.
How much are these devices?
I think this one goes for about like $430. The Marantz one goes for like roughly $460. There's actually a new one from M Audio that is about the size of like a portable media player, and I think that one's right around $500, and it also uses compact flash.
Adobe Audition has this functionality of noise suppression.
Yes.
Do you ever use that?
Yes, I do. And actually, that's one of the things, depending on, although like if you've got like crowd noise at, like say you're at the CES trade show floor and you've got a whole lot of crowd noise in the background, getting rid of that, using that feature is very, very hard because you've got all of the, like a lot of the frequencies that are going to be in the background noise are also going to be frequencies that are coming through from the people actually speaking. And so it doesn't really work as well in that sort of a situation. If you've got like say, like if there's a fan in the room, you can very easily eliminate that using noise reduction.
Do you do the scanning yourself to know roughly what kind of environment it is and then apply them the different?
Yeah, and actually that's something I probably should have brought that up. Like typically when we record in an environment, I will turn the recorder on like I don't know, somewhere between 5 to 10 seconds ahead of time, so that we kind of get sort of a baseline for how much background noise there is in the room. It's also a good idea to do that if you're using like a headset plugged into your computer. Although, depending on what kind of headset it is, I mean, like this headset does a really good job of noise canceling. So in all likelihood, you're not going to really pick up any background noise because it's like sort of has a hard threshold for where it will start recognizing that there's even any volume. Yes?
Do you find much difference between like the headset microphone and the desktop microphone with the pop filter on it?
In terms of audio quality, you get a much more natural sound out of something like that, but you have a lot less hassle of actually having to do any editing to the audio file if you have this because of the noise canceling built into something like this. And granted, this is like probably, I don't know, $20 or something like that. And actually, this condenser mic that I have here is a fairly cheap example of a condenser mic. But the thing that this does is it picks up, like if you got a computer in the room, it picks up the fan noise of the computer in the room. It picks up if somebody's like knocks on your door, it's going to pick that up. If somebody's stomping on the floor above you, depending on where you are, it'll pick that up. So I mean, it picks up everything because that's what it's designed to do. And so you get a much more like natural voice sound as a result of that. But there's a trade-off of you have a lot more cleaning up of the file that you have to do after the fact.
That wasn't made with podcasting in mind. That was made with, you know.
Well, this is made with a sound booth in mind. Yes, definitely.
Old-fashioned.
Oh, I was wondering what hardware you had on that box up there, because it's what, 17-minute track and it took like 2 minutes to.
Oh, it's what is it? It's a Pentium M, I think.
How much RAM?
There's 2 gigs of RAM. I pretty much won't buy anything that doesn't have 2 gigs of RAM.
So it'd be a lot slower on my mail machine, basically, if I tried to do the same.
Probably, yes. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I don't have anything back in the background running. That's the other thing. Before you start doing any audio recording, shut everything else off. Close your mail, close your IM clients, close your, even close like antivirus and spyware stuff. Turn it off because it all uses resources that you don't really need while you're doing audio editing because you shouldn't really be like surfing the web and running the risk of infecting yourself while you're doing it anyway. Because otherwise you start saying because you got distracted by some really cool article that somebody wrote. I think was there another question over here? Okay. Well, anyway, since this isn't actually going to do the processing that it should do, because for some reason I've got way too many files on the hard drive. Someday I need to get a laptop with like a 200 gig drive or something. I'd probably still fill it up. But then after the file is processed, because I mean basically, here, let's. I'm going to close some files here real quick and see if, because after the file is processed, what I would do next is save it out as an MP3. Typically, I save the file as a WAV file, and I'll archive a copy of the WAV file, so that if we ever need to go back and like if I want to take a snippet out of it, like say we have we do an interview with somebody and then want to do a follow-up interview with them later, it may make sense to marry some parts of both of those files together because it might create a more cohesive picture. But so I'll save out the WAV file, and then Audition has this has it built in. You can either do like a save as where and then you just select MP3 format, WMA format. Unfortunately, it doesn't have, if you want to write a script for it, I think it will actually do a script where you can save out like every format that you'd want all at once. I haven't bothered to figure out the Adobe scripting language, so I don't currently do that. It'd probably be worth my time to do that. But generally what I do is I'll just save up a bunch of WAV files, and then it does have a batch processing mode where if you are doing lots of content, you can import the WAV files and step through a process of exporting WMA for all those files or MP3 for all those files. And even though the Windows Media Team would probably like you to use WMA format, and maybe the company mandates it, I would highly recommend considering MP3 as a format alternative, because there are a lot of people who are just insisting on MP3 for podcast format for some ungodly reason, probably because everybody owns an iPod. But it's just one of the unfortunate realities of podcasting at the moment is this 10-year-old format. Yes, Jed.
So how does it break down for AAC versus WMA versus MP3? Like if you were to think about it as market share for a whole pie of podcasts?
How does that break down for file formats?
AAC, I'm not really sure. I don't know if anybody outside the people that are doing those enhanced podcasts that show up on iTunes are actually doing AAC, because that's probably the only real value in using AAC as a format at the moment, because you're still talking for the most part voice audio. MP3, based on the statistics for like the Chris Pirillo show, we've probably got somewhere over 90% of the downloads are MP3 format, and the rest of it is all WMA format. So I mean, it's probably, I would say that most people are only putting out MP3 format files, so it's probably 95% of the market at least is MP3 format at this point. So if you're not putting out an MP3 format file, you're probably going to count on people importing WMA files into iTunes and converting them, because that's just the reality for right now, at least. So once you've got your audio file,
You've got about 5 minutes left here.
Oh, really?
Yep. Is it an hour, right?
No, it's longer than that.
What the hell would be that? I'm sorry.
Okay. So after you got the audio file saved out and you've got it in MP3 format, or WMA format, depending, the next thing you want to do is take that file, and I gotta find an MP3 on here. All right. So I have a little utility called Audio Shell Tag Editor that I installed that lets me right-click on any MP3 or WMA file and actually edit the ID3 tags right on it, because it's, I don't know, that's just, for me, that's been the easiest way to do it. Like, everybody makes an ID3 tag editor. There's an ID3 tag editor called Advanced Tag Editor in Windows Media Player 10. In terms of actually going through and quickly editing files, that is not the quickest way to do it, unless you're really wanting to go through and like actually work with a whole ton of music files, because the podcasting stuff doesn't really fit into the genres that have been designed for music anyway. So the key things that you want in the podcast from an ID3 standpoint is you want the title, the artist, which, I mean, we typically go with the Chris Pirillo Show as the artist, and then the album information. I have generally used that as sort of the way to keep track of when the show, or when the particular file, like that's sort of the timeline for when the file was created. Because like one of the things that a lot of people want is because they're downloading, say, maybe 10 or 15 different things from you, possibly all at once because they just found your podcast for the first time, and they want to listen to them in order. And so some of the people in the podcast space, rather than giving you a meaningful title of the file, give you, like, say, they would truncate the file name to, like, say, CPS for Chris Pirillo Show, 2005 0630 for it being like the June 30th show. And for some things, I think that may work if you only put out, say, one show a week and it's always kind of about the same thing. But if you're talking about specific things, I mean, like for example, if you're covering like a Microsoft event, and you've got you've talked to developers, say, about C# specifically, or you talk to like VB developers specifically, titling the podcast, WinHeck 2005 June 30th, and then just part 1 or whatever doesn't really tell anybody anything, because like if somebody is only a VB6 developer, they're probably not going to care about the C# information, and vice versa. And so I've sort of taken the stance that the title needs to be somewhat relevant to the information. I mean, granted, if the information is all over the map that's actually in the audio file, it's tough to have a title that covers everything in the audio file. But if you can at least give some sort of indication about what the actual show is about, I think there's meaning in that. And then the artist, you should be very consistent with the artist of the show. I know, like, say, IT Conversations really frustrates me with the way they label their podcast, because the artist will be whoever they happen to interview on any given week. And so I've got like all these artists, like, because they put out sometimes like 3 or 4 different shows a day. And so I've got like these, I don't know, hundreds of artists that I'm like, I don't even know who that guy is. And I mean, they may have something that I really want to hear about, but I don't know, because I don't know who, I don't know who Bob Jones is, because there's no, it's not even Bob Jones from, major security company. It's just Bob Jones is the artist. And so that's frustrating. Be very consistent with the artist title. Make it, if it's the WinHeck podcast, make the artist the WinHeck podcast all the way across the board. And then what we use for the album is, and that's where I kind of designate when the show took place, because since we're putting it, and this may not make sense for everybody either, but I mean, for what we do, we put out at a minimum 3 hours of content every week. And so if it's part of that weekly content, then it becomes, the album is always going to be the weekly show and the date of the weekly show, so that you know that like the 3 1-hour segments that we put out in that time frame are all from that weekly show. And for like, if we cover like, because we cover like search engine strategies and a couple other conferences. And so the album in that instance will be like Search Engine Strategies New York 2005. So that next year when we cover Search Engine Strategies in New York, it will be Search Engine Strategies New York 2006, so that there's some differentiation and it doesn't get wildly confusing as to where the content came from. And I mean, that's something that I think a lot of people don't really pay enough attention to, is actually labeling stuff so that it's in some kind of a logical scenario so that you can figure it out. And then from there, and I'm sure you're all familiar with FTP, so I probably don't really need to cover how to FTP a file. And I don't know if, internally, I'm assuming that there are procedures that are probably dark and mysterious to me as to how audio and video get out to the public-facing world on Microsoft.com. But the big key after that is somehow getting that audio and video content linked up with an RSS feed, because the RSS feed is what's going to actually allow people to subscribe to the information if they want to subscribe to the information and receive it, either through iTunes or through Windows Media, through one of the like 20 different freeware apps that are all able to do it right now. And in terms of the RSS feed, what you have to have for the RSS feed is a title for what the post is, a description which could consist of just a link to the audio file, but is really more helpful if you actually sort of synopsize what's actually in the information, and then the audio file, and then the link to the audio file. And that needs to be each individual entry. I don't know in terms of, I'm not familiar with what content management systems you guys have on the back end of things to be able to do this on an automated fashion, so I don't know if I can speak specifically to how that process works. Is there content management?
Content management.
What do you do?
What do we do? I use movable type, because it automatically, if I make like I log in, I type in a title of the post, type in a description, link to the audio file. There's an automated process that automatically reads the length of the file and inserts that in the RSS feed. And so I don't have to actually like do any manual editing of anything from that point on. It just automatically gets injected into the RSS feed each time we post something new.
Does the audio file doesn't end up in the RSS feed, just a link?
A link to the audio file ends up in the RSS
So like kind of any blogging software would just basically, it's like doing a blog post and...
Yeah. I know that WordPress and WordPress blog lines, which is like co-branded under a zillion different names, movable type, I think TypePad, which is the ASP version of movable type, and I'm trying to think I don't know if Blogger actually directly supports it or not. The thing is, if whatever your content management system is doesn't currently support enclosures, I mean, you could technically do it with a MySpaces blog. You would need to have a place to host the audio, because I think that MySpaces accounts are limited to like 30 megs of of content of any size or of any type. But you could go over to feedburner.com, which allows you to create an RSS feed that will look at your MySpace's RSS or MSN Space's RSS feed, and it will automatically detect that there is an audio file in there and do all of the enclosure of the file, and then you just make that FeedBurner feed the publicly available feed. And they've got a wizard that will walk you through that. It's a piece of cake to set up. Then one of the things that is it's sort of come on my radar as being more important after having it sort of drilled in my head at 2 different search engine strategies conferences is there's a whole lot being overlooked about the way the text information that's connected to the audio enclosure is handled. I mean, it's very common practice for most of the podcasting world to maybe say, title the podcast, like My Weekly Podcast, June 30th, 2005, and then link to the file, and then they'll have like 20 links to whatever it was they talked about in the podcast, and which really doesn't give you any information. If you're doing like a web search for, like using the sort of the C# or VB as an example, if I'm doing a search for C# and there's this podcast about C# and that's what they did, I'm never going to find that. If I search Google or MSN or Yahoo, that will not come up in the search results because there's like no meta information there at all for me to work with. So something that really is just as important in terms of having people find your podcast as doing all the stuff to make the audio sound good and compelling is optimizing the text the same way you would optimize the text if you were posting just plain text content with no audio file associated with it at all. Having the page title, like the header H1 information, the body text needs to all be keyword optimized the same way you would keyword optimize any other page on Microsoft.com, because that's the way people are going to find the majority of podcasts over the long haul. The short term, people are finding them either just because they're curious and they're looking at iPodder.org, they're looking at Odeo, which is another directory, or they're looking at what's the other one that's the major one? iTunes. Anyway, so those are the 3 places that people are finding podcasts right now. And actually, if our experience is any indication, probably like somewhere between 50 and 60% of all podcast traffic is coming through iTunes right now. Based on, and I'm basing that on just the log files from the Chris Pirillo show. So, and I can't imagine that our audience is that much different, especially considering that most of what we talk about is Windows related and not Apple related at all. So I think over the long haul, it's going to be, until somebody invents a search technology that actually lets you search inside audio files for contextually relevant stuff, you got to give a synopsis that's actually meaningful that's going to come up in the search results. So if somebody is searching for, say, C# development, and I'm not a developer, so I probably shouldn't even be using developer languages as an example, but if somebody's searching for C#, there's a potential that could come up, within the first certain number of results. Or if they're searching for C# and podcast, it'll come up as something that's a relevant topic because you've actually given a description that's meaningful instead of just throwing up an audio file and hoping people are going to find it. So, what other questions do people have? Yes. Yes. Yeah. The stuff that I'm talking about is all linked to in the guide.
And also to the software that you mentioned, like this.
Adobe Audition is not currently in the version that is available now. It will be on Friday. Because initially I had targeted, the audience was specifically targeted towards people who really aren't interested in spending any extra money on software, and which is not really the world that I live in any of the stuff that I do, but that's kind of who the podcasting audience is. It's a lot of DIY type people, And Adobe Audition is a whole lot more efficient way to do it because the tools, you're not trying to hack together things the same way that you are in the sort of DIY model.
Do you also cover the basic terminology? Like DB, it's obvious that we wanted it to reach 6 and not beyond, and I have no idea what 6 and -6 means. And
Yes, I do cover that terminology.
Go ahead, Jeff.
So you have to go through. I mean, if you record 1 hour, interview, you have, according to you described, you have to go through, from the beginning to the end to identify the regions where you want to enhance the volume, and that's a lot of time-consuming work, isn't it? Is there any automatic way of doing that?
Well, I mean, there's actually probably a mathematical way if you could just go through and automatically script all of that.
I mean, you can do automatic gain control and then use the noise suppression to get rid of some of the noise that got amplified.
Yeah, I mean, the ideal scenario is that you try to do everything that you can so that you get an even level throughout, so that you don't end up with a lot of loud and quiet parts throughout the file.
You get rid of some noise that maybe through the.
I mean, and that's if you're doing that, say at your desk or in a studio environment, it's a whole lot easier to control that than if you're doing it from any trade show floor. I mean, the file that I was using an example of is from one of the conferences that we went to.
So roughly, for 1 hour of recording, how many hours do you have to do editing? Just approximate.
It entirely depends, but I usually assume that it's going to take me a minimum of an hour for every hour of audio content that I have. Yes?
If you had a hypothetical big monolithic software company that was trying to start using podcasting to advance our goals, what are the dumb things that we do that make us real obvious to the podcasting community, that turn people off? What mistakes do big companies do when they try to deal with something that's so grassroots?
Are you afraid of being called a podcast movie or something? Well, it's probably standard concept, I'm guessing.
Well, no, because I don't think that it's necessarily a standards issue. I think actually, I haven't heard really anybody make any negative comments about Channel 9, which is the most obvious example.
But that is a good example, because the thing that Channel 9 does is it's not highly produced.
Right. It's not highly produced.
That's what gives it a grassroots feel to it. If it was really, really super slick produced like ABC or something like that, then it probably wouldn't have the same appeal to that.
I would say that the big mistake would be sending it to MS Studios for production.
Exactly.
and I think Pete would actually agree.
Well, actually, I disagree with that, and I'll tell you why. So, Pete, I'll boost, because we actually do our audio recordings over there, and all the editing and everything is done over there. Number one, I don't have the time to do it. Okay, I've got way too much on my plate. But the other thing is that me as the director, producer, client, whatever my role is, I determine what the quality level is. Is it more, guerrilla type recordings that I'm doing, or is it a very cool, slick piece that I do? I mean, that's in your control. Now, it depends on budget, it depends on time, but I don't have any problems going to studios with certain things.
Now, when you say cool and slick, do you mean like the Office dinosaur campaign that's on TV right now?
Not call that cool in any way, shape.
Well, it's not cool, but it is slick production.
Yes.
And
Yes,
to
very.
me, that is like the quintessential. Don't do that if you really want people to tune in.
Quintessential anti-podcast.
Yeah.
Type.
Because there is a high value in having good quality sound. When I say don't go to MS Studios, I don't mean don't go to MS Studios to do the recording. I mean don't process it to the point where it looks like it's a marketing piece, not something where you're trying to convey some information.
Right, but again, as the client, you determine the style in which your finished product is. You should have that control. If you don't, shame on you, because you've given up that control.
True. Well, no, and I mean that it's exactly true that you should not. The vision for what you're doing should be your vision. At the same time, if your vision doesn't meet with customer expectations, you need to be willing to shift your vision so that the customer will actually tune in and listen. Because if you do a really slick piece and nobody downloads it, you just wasted a bunch of money on a really slick piece.
And that comes back to
Yes.
One question I have for you is, what if you found the optimal bit rate to encode to, given file size versus audio quality?
For audio, we typically do like 64K. So I mean, and sometimes actually with Windows Media, we've gone down to like 48 kbps mono because like in terms of like the perceptible difference between that and say a 64K MP3, it's virtually the same.
Are you doing multi-bit rate streams on files or video?
We're not really doing that much video right now. And actually, I would, unless you're offering a stream only, multi-bit rate doesn't really work for on-demand content.
Right.
So, I mean, you could definitely do multi-bit rate if you're gonna offer like something that's streamed only. And I would highly recommend that because there's still a surprising number of dial-up users, but but I mean, in terms of on-demand, no.
So a couple questions / comments. One of my favorite podcasts is Inside Mac Radio. Listen to that at all?
I have not listened to that one.
It's really short. It's maybe 10 minutes long, and it has a specific format where they've got a piece of intro music. The guy comes on, he says, today we're going to cover blah, 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 blah. Then he goes to maybe a commercial, then he goes to the stories. He might have a break in between stories with another commercial, and then he's got outro music, right? And it's the same way every time, and it sounds the same way, and it has that sort of familiar feel to it. Every time you hear the intro music, you know how the show's going to go down. I don't listen to the Chris Pirillo show that much. I've maybe listened to it once or twice. Are you guys more freeform, or do you have a structure like this?
Well, we have a format that pretty much every single piece starts with me saying something about it being sponsored by Windows Media, and then closing with that. But what happens in between there can sort of get off track on a very regular basis. I mean, most of what we're doing is either an interview with somebody, which can either be a very cut and dried interview. Like we did an interview with the CEO of Ask.com that hasn't been posted yet, and that's pretty stock interviewing a CEO because you can't really deviate too much from that. But I mean, if you talk about like interviewing some of the bloggers and that, it can go off on some wild tangent, and sometimes that'll have to get edited down because the tangent just gets like way out there.
But show structure is
show structure is kind of it's loose.
Okay, so second question or comment is, I kind of noticed when you're going through that, it seems like a lot of the stuff you're doing, you just sort of ad hoc, right? You record some stuff, you save it as an MP3, you use a tool to put the ID3 tags on there, you FTP it to a site, you go up there, you add the show notes and make sure the RSS is right. Have you looked at any of the tools that are starting to emerge that kind of do all that stuff for you, like what's his face is
Castblaster? Castblaster is kind of a piece of crap.
It's a piece of crap. It's crap for sure, but the notion's good, right?
No, the notion is really good. And actually the one to watch is an app called Propaganda from Mixmeister, who's based here somewhere in the area. And if they would actually fix the RSS piece of it, I would say that it is a really great app. But because the way their RSS implementation is, it makes it nothing more than an app to record and then maybe throw some music underneath it. But it has potential. I mean, there's all of them. And actually, there's another one called, I think, like Mixcast that is another guy that's like some guy developing in his basement here, somewhere here in the Seattle area that has potential, but is sort of an unrealized potential in terms of implementation. So I mean, the theory behind having an all-in-one like podcasting end-to-end solution is a great idea. I would love to see somebody do it.
Well, I think the problem is that you've got this mix between all of the audio production that you need to do, and you need the power of a program like Audition if you really want to do it right, and use the filters to do compression and what in order to make it sound right. And those guys that are building those applications aren't necessarily going to invest in all that audio, the DSP processing stuff, and you really want them to. There seems like there needs to be an intermediate tool which would take a produced file that maybe you've already done a mix down on to get all your music intro and all that stuff, that does all of the sort of podcasting sort of work, puts a consistent set of tags on it, loads it up, makes sure the RSS gets created, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I mean, and actually I think that's kind of the missing piece. A little bit of that is handled. There's a company called Libsyn, or Liberated Syndication, that is one of the sort of hosting providers for podcasts. And they've got a pretty decent setup where, I mean, you go through, you make like your sort of your blog post entry, and you click a browse button, find the file on your hard drive, upload the file. If you happen to forget to put in the ID3 tags, you can like edit the ID3 tags from a web interface so that I mean, you're not having it. Because I mean, like one of the things that I run into with doing the FTP is if I decide that the ID3 tags need to be changed, I have to re-upload the file, which isn't that big a deal, but still, it's something that shouldn't necessarily have to be done. Yeah.
You had mentioned that you were going to give away free this podcaster starter kit book,
yes.
Right? So how do we get that?
I think it's gonna be made available on a share or something.
I think what we're going to be able to do, this is being archived here in the MS Research thing that you see, and we're going to try and put a link on there to it. If for some, Tamara thought she could do that. If she can't do that, I'll do it off of my X-Learning site, and I'll send out mail to people. And if you want to ping me, Dick Carl. But give us a day or two to see if we can get it up there, and I think that'll work best, because then when people watch this archive, they'll also be able to go get it.
Yes?
I've seen people recording with little memory sticks that have a microphone. They just hang it on their neck. Did you try any of those?
The IRiver stuff works reasonably well to do that with. The one thing that you can run into is either A, picking up a lot of background noise if you don't get the right microphone, or B, if you don't get your volume level set quite right, you're going to end up with like a lot of distorted audio files. I know there's one example of that is there's a friend of mine that has a site that does DVD reviews, and they interview like a lot of directors and stuff, and they'll go to trade shows that are specific to like the movie industry, and they used to do, I don't know what they were using to interview people with, but they used to like consistently come back with these audio files that were just like all blown out, and I mean, like the crowd was almost as loud as the people they were interviewing, and I mean, you can't, that's stuff that you just cannot fix in the editing process. And so I mean, that's the one trick to using the memory stick recorders, is you got to make sure that you've got one that is adjustable to the point where you're not going to end up with a problem like that. I think Audio Technica makes a microphone that you can plug into one of those that actually works really well for canceling out noise. I don't remember I'll see if I can find the exact model number. I can't remember the model number of that particular mic.
From a consumer standpoint, aside from the iPod and iTunes, what's the most common non-Apple configuration where people are listening to their podcasts?
I don't know if there is. Matt, do you guys have any, like, is there any background on that?
I probably should have checked the WPlugin download.
Good place to get a sense of what apps people are using. But,
I mean, I would say, like, in terms of, actually, we could probably pull up WM plugins over here, but devices, I think the Creative Zen Micro is probably one of the most popular of the Place for Sure devices, right? Yeah. I say at this point, I think that probably at this year's CES we're going to see like a big shift in like what kind of devices people are buying. Possibly even still sticking with the iPod, but I think we're going to see better competition than what we've seen in the past from like the non-iPod community.
Use your phone, right?
Yeah. No, this has a like a mini SD card in it, and so it's what I use because I already have a phone in my pocket and I don't really want to carry something else. I think like when you see like the Nokia N91 out in full force and like that. What is it, the Motorola Q that is their next one that's got like a thumb keyboard on it that people are calling the Razorberry. I think that we're going to start seeing a lot more phones used as MP3 players than we have in the past.
And in that case, your phone, you're relying on some software on your PC to do the subscription synchronization?
Actually, there's, for this particular smartphone, I don't know if it works for the entire smartphone line or not. It also works for Pocket PC. There's two different apps called, I think it's iPodder SP and SmartFeed that will actually, you can actually like just sync the stuff directly to your phone, like it installs on your phone and then you can just download directly. They've even got a cab file that if you browse to it, you can download the cab file and install without ever connecting. The downside to that is that at least with the AT&T network, you're talking like insanely slow, like dial-up like speed, and so downloading a 15 meg file isn't very practical. You're talking like 19. Yeah, I mean, no, you can definitely sync on Media Player 10, which is an optimal way to do it. But if for whatever reason you're like stuck in the airport, and your laptop battery had died, you could download something, and maybe by the time you got on the plane, you'd be able to listen to it, or maybe not. So hopefully we'll see some EVDO stuff come out where we can actually have higher speed data. Yeah.
Is there a reliable third-party source for determining the reach of these podcasts? I mean, I know like with iTunes, I've heard that it's just by the subscribe buttons that are hit, like how many times it's hit. Kind of like what we see with websites.
At this point, I don't think that there is anybody that I would say is reliable, because there's not a single directory that has everything listed. There's not like, I guess even like Alexa and that is pretty unreliable in terms of website stats too. So I mean, you're kind of at the mercy of whatever anybody is telling you.
But you could probably vouch for the stats for your own podcast, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly vouch for the stats for my own podcast in terms of the log files can be made available to somebody. Whether or not you can get people to do that across the board, I don't know. Okay. Yes.
I noticed when you were putting in the ID3 tags in your thing, you didn't put podcast anywhere.
No, I did not put podcast.
Is there any way to identify when you go to a page that there's a podcast there versus just a bunch of WAV files or MP3 files?
I mean, technically, you could put in the genre. A lot of people put podcast in the genre of their files. I am like very anti using podcast as a genre because I think that's kind of stupid. Because if I'm talking about cheese, if I have like the cheese podcast, telling everybody it's a podcast doesn't really help them, because they don't know that it's about cheese. Or I mean, to use like we use technology trends is the genre tag that we use. I mean, the big thing is if they have an RSS feed that you can subscribe to, that's going to be what's going to be really obvious that it's a podcast versus just files available for download.
Well, I mean, the reason I asked is I just started listening to podcasts on my iPod, sorry, and I noticed that it has a podcast pick on the main menu, but there's never anything in it, and you have to go searching around to find what are actually podcasts. So it's actually kind of annoying to have to.
Oh, on iTunes?
No, on an iPod itself, on the actual interface of your iPod. There's a.
Yeah, there is a podcast.
But nothing ever shows up there.
Oh, you have to actually subscribe to something for it to show up.
Okay.
And you have to actually subscribe to it through iTunes. Through there, because there's like a podcast link, I think, on the main page of iTunes Music stuff.
I don't use iTunes to sync with it, but
well, if you have an iPod, you have to pretty much use iTunes.
You can use like Media Monkey or something like that.
Well, but the experience is hampered. Yes.
So in terms of the RSS format for podcasts, what if I wanted to embed more metadata, like text, for example? I have the transcription of the podcast, and I want to make it available for search. Is there a field for doing that?
Basically, just the standard description field for an RSS feed.
So I would just dump all the text in the description field.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be the same description field that you would if you were just providing a standard text RSS feed. And actually, I mean, technically, that's kind of where you're putting the link to the MP3 file, although it's getting rewritten when it actually gets rewritten to the RSS feed.
But there's a link element there in the RSS feed as well.
Yes. But the link is not the MP3 file. The link is still a link, just like a link to some sort of web page or something.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Do you guys create a blog entry for every podcast that you do?
Yes. Specifically so that, in theory, it can be picked up by search engine.
The show notes there that you would also put in the RSS typically? Or?
Yeah. I mean, basically, because the way we've got it set up, it's write once, published like in a bunch of different places. Because we've got three different RSS feeds. Because we've got a WMA RSS feed, an MP3 one, and then one that has text with no actual encoded file.
Do you guys script that, or do you do that all by hand?
Like in terms of
production.
It's all done automatically. I mean, I'll type up whatever it is, and post it into Google Type, and then it spits out all the different formats through templates, which is definitely an ideal way to do it. Yeah. Are there any other questions?
What do you think about companies like Blake's that are using kind of voice recognition to run podcasts or to generate more metadata? You see that getting any traction?
I don't see it necessarily getting a lot of traction over the short term because the computing power isn't realistically there to just churn out exclusive text, and it's not reliable. I mean, I've thought about just to see how it would work, sort of doing a test of as I'm speaking, run Dragon Naturally Speaking in the background just to see what I come up with at the end. But I don't think realistically that you're going to see a whole lot of that yet.
They have a toolkit. They have an SDK for doing audio mining in particular, and they can run 2 times real time. Right.
But if you're talking though an hour of content a day per podcast, I mean, if you could convince every single podcaster to do that, yeah, it might be compelling. But ideally, you'd almost want to have like somebody providing like a Google-like search service that would do that, and you're talking like some sort of massive server farm to pull it off because you're pulling down hundreds of hours of content. So I don't know. I mean, I just don't see that as being a realistic, over the short term anyway, solution.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time.